Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another restful episode of true, scary stories to help you fall asleep. Today, we're going to be reading true, scary home invasion stories. I hope you enjoy them. So without further ado, lay back, relax, and enjoy these true, scary stories. I was watching Cubed 2 with a friend. It was about 2 a.m. We heard the back door open and close. Didn't think anything of it as we were hoping. We had multiple roommates, and generally a pretty good food of trafficking throughout the week. We kept watching the movie. After a minute, I looked up across the room at my friends. They were looking at the hallway, so I looked over and I saw a gun with a hand holding it, and that's all I could see. Then the man with a gun entered the room and threw a big red duffel bag on the floor and said, "Put everything in the bag." I then started to explain to him that he had the wrong house. He walked up to me, put the gun to my head and said, "Go upstairs and get your stuff." I grabbed the bag and started walking towards the stairs. My friend got right behind me, with the gunman following behind him. There were 2 turns in the stairway. At the second turn, I ran to my room and yelled, "We're getting robbed." Once in my room, I grabbed a machete, but remembered that I had just bought a gun 2 days prior. I grabbed the gun, threw the magazine in and cocked it twice. I then stood at my door yelling, "Crumbs." That's my friend's name who was behind me. After a minute, he opened his door adjacent to mine and said he was okay. I heard a door slam downstairs, so I swept the house quickly and went to the front door. He was gone, and he left his bag. 10 years later, I met the gunman while in treatment. I asked him to cut my hair for me, and let him know during the haircut that I forgave him. I was the victim of a home invasion in the late 90s, when I was only 6 while home with my 8-year-old brother and our babysitter. Our babysitter was tied up, while one of the 4 guys sat with us and watched the Dinosaurs sitcom on TV, while the others ransacked every bedroom in the house. We lived on a rural property, and the home invaders cut our telephone cords and told my brother and I that they'd come back for us if we told anything about what was happening. They managed to get away with a lot of stuff, but thankfully everyone was unharmed. Safe to say, that experience ruined ever watching the Dinosaur Show ever again. My story's not that bad. I was at my ex's house. It was around dusk in the winter, and I was going to shower and make dinner while he took his dog to the vet. He left and I was upstairs. I brought my phone and clean clothes to the bathroom, off the landing right outside the bedroom, and then went back for my makeup bag, which I promptly spilled everywhere. So I was picking up and organizing my stuff, and trying to fix something that broke, when I dropped it. And suddenly I just felt startled out of nowhere, with no noises or anything. Like, suddenly my hearing was so sharp that I swear I could hear my own heart beating. And I was really freaked out, and I was sure that my boyfriend's condo was haunted, until I smelled cigarette smoke. Neither myself nor my boyfriend were smokers at the time, so I knew that someone was inside, even though I couldn't see nor hear them. Nearly the entire condo was an open loft style, except for the bedroom off the landing and an office, and I couldn't go onto the landing to get my phone from the bathroom because I was sure that someone was there, so I tried the balcony, but it was facing a parking lot off of a closed business, so nobody was there to flag down for help. I decided that I was going to jump off the balcony if they tried to get into the room that I was in, because it was only the second floor. So I just waited, standing totally still, like halfway between the bed and the balcony, and tried to hear something. And suddenly, a male voice loudly said, "Come look at this ugly bathroom." And then a few seconds later, there was a crash, and two people ran by the bedroom door and down the stairs and straight out the front door, leaving it wide open, banging in the wind. So I realized that they were in the bathroom, or one of them was, when they must have seen my phone and clothes, because my phone was in the tub with the screen cracked, and they knocked over a large towel rack. Nothing was missing, including a gold ring and a laptop that was setting out on the kitchen island. But one of them squashed a cigarette in the upstairs carpet, which I thought was a bit uncool. The cops thought that it was two kids who'd been doing B&Es in the area, but nothing ever came of it, and that was more than 10 years ago. This was an interesting situation, to say the least. I was trying to sleep one night, but I just couldn't at all. So I just tried to relax and watch a show. I had my earbuds in and our AC going, but I could hear a noise in the background. I get up and hear my father-in-law yelling from his apartment downstairs, two-family house. I was going down to see what is happening, and I see him standing in his kitchen, gushing blood from a head injury. I get my wife to call 911 and get pressure on his cut. He tells me that he woke up to a guy with a gun in his face, demanding money, then hit him in the head when he said something. My father-in-law grabs him by the gun hand and wrestles it away. Turns out it was fake. Then proceeds to march the guy back to the window that he came in from and full-on throw him out of the second-story window. The house had a walkout basement. We call the cops, and they catch him covered in blood from the fall. He denied it. It was interesting because he dropped a bag with his ID in it and a bunch of stolen medications. What was even more interesting was to hear my father-in-law describe to a judge how he threw the guy out the window. The guy who broke in was out on bail on the charge, then cut off the ankle bracelet and ran. They got him again, and he didn't get bail the second time. He was convicted, but I can't remember at all what he ended up for a sentence. For a while, it was very hard to sleep, and my father-in-law couldn't sleep in that room anymore because of it. I am still super sensitive to sounds in the house at night, and I double and triple check windows, too. This was New Year's Eve, 2017. My nan had died a week before on Christmas Eve, so naturally, I got obliterated drunk. Cleaned the flat up top to tail. Got tons of booze in. Got a couple of friends round to drink with me, and my girlfriend. All was good. At 10 p.m., a knock comes on the door. I'm too busy drinking and obnoxiously playing guitar to care. My mate opens it, comes back to me and says, "There's a lad at the door for you." He asks for me by name, and it's a dude that I don't know, even a little bit. I ask what he wants. He says he wants to see Chris, and I said that I was the only Chris in the building. He was clearly on something and vacantly staggered down the stairs of the block. Me and my friend go to wish a couple other friends a happy new year about an hour later, leaving our girlfriends in the flat to party. We get a 15-minute walk away from the flat, and my girlfriend rings. Someone's pounding out of the door. I tell them to lock themselves in the bathroom, and me and my friend sprint a mile home, blind drunk in 6 minutes. Halfway, she rings again, whispering this time, "The door's been kicked through. Someone's in the flat." Got to the block in a panic, rang the buzzer 3 times before I got an answer. Ran up the stairs, and there was the jerk from before with my electric guitar in one hand and my girlfriend's laptop in the other. I saw red and lunged at him, punching him in the side of the head and pinballing it against the wall behind him. I don't remember hitting him for that long, or even that particularly hard, but I must have, because I broke my hand, and the police informed me that he was in the ICU with a swelling on his brain. I never got into any trouble for it, but I was traumatized for a good while afterwards. So now, because of that incident, I don't drink anymore. I was 14 years old. I woke up one night to a commotion outside my bedroom door. I left my bedroom and saw my dad in his underwear running up and down the hallway, and my mom on the phone. My first thought was that my younger brother was having an asthma attack. It had happened before and required my mom to call an ambulance. Well, then my dad ran back into his bedroom and came out with a baseball bat. That's when I heard the pounding on the front door and realized that someone was trying to get in. The dude was smashing his fist on the door, shaking the doorknob and screaming incoherently. Thankfully, the door was locked. My dad started yelling back, "You've got the wrong house, dude, and cops are on their way." But the guy wasn't leaving. He kept trying to get in. It was about this time that I realized my younger brother, who was 9 years old, was also standing in the hallway, crying his eyes out in fear. I was still too shocked to move, cry, or anything. I didn't know what to do. I just knew that I was insanely scared, since we didn't have any type of firearms in the house. My mom grabbed both me and my brother and pulled us into her bedroom while my dad stood at the top of the stairs, yelling at the guy to leave. My mom stayed on the line with 911. The guy continued to pound and scream. The dog we had at the time, a basset hound / beagle mix, was howling. At some point, the man started howling back at the dog. This is when I slowly started to realize that the guy was either drunk or on something. I wasn't familiar with drugs or alcohol, but I could tell that he was messed up. Eventually, the cops showed up and confronted him. They asked him who he was, where he thought he was, why he was there, etc. He then gave them some story about how a woman had dropped him off, and he was just trying to get inside. They cuffed him and took him to jail. Turns out, he had lived in our house 30 plus years ago as a child. He and his mom moved out after his dad died. My parents moved in shortly thereafter. That night, he had gotten absolutely plastered and drove drunk to his childhood home, thinking that he still lived there. Ran over one of our bushes. He had a flat tire. His car was parked diagonally across our driveway. Half of it was still in the grass. He was just trying to get in to go to bed. While he never actually made it inside, the thing that always freaked me out was that we typically never lock our doors. One of my parents just happened to lock it that night, and his childhood bedroom was my younger brother's bedroom. He had showed up any other night. He very likely would have walked in on my sleeping 9-year-old brother, and who knows what would have happened then. Lock your doors, and don't drink and drive. I lived alone across the street from my family's dairy where I worked. I was taking a nap one day during my lunch when I woke to the sound of voices. My Spanish wasn't good enough to understand them, and my quarter-awake brain kept saying that they were outside, even though a part of it was saying that's not right. I opened my bedroom door and quickly woke all the way up when I seen a guy, 6 feet from me, with both of my bass guitars in his hands. For a moment, I swear we shared the same look. "You're not supposed to be here." Then his eyes grew as wide as saucers, while I apparently grew horns and fangs while shouting, "What the heck do you think you're doing?" He immediately dropped the guitars and ran, and I could hear the sounds of a second person in the living room, stepping on a plate that I had left on the floor, breaking it. I'm still amazed that my adrenaline-fueled brain heard and processed the sound and recognized that there were 2 intruders. I chased them to the front door, swearing and yelling the whole way, but stopped at the door because I didn't want to get in a 2v1 fight. It was at that moment I heard the second intruder, who was getting in the driver's seat, yelling, "Pistola, pistola." I thought, I don't have a gun. Then looked to the passenger and seen that he was already in the car, with a pistol in his hand hanging it out of the window. Instead of intelligently driving back through the driveway, my angry self decided that it was better to yell "F you" one last time, and I flipped them the bird in case their English wasn't that good, then walked back inside and slammed the door shut. They never were caught, probably because I couldn't give a decent description or a license plate. I believe the only thing they took was my iPod. They had put my expensive laptop into its backpack to take it, but had left it behind in their hurry to leave. From that day on, I've always kept a stick in my sliding glass door, since that's how those buttholes had gotten into my house. I also got a safe, so I could move my pistol from my parents' place to mine. Coming up on 14 years since it happened. Dang, how time flies. To preface, I, a 23-year-old female, was 4 years old at the time. My mom and my little brother, 2 at the time, lived in a rinky-dink fifth wheel with bad AC in a generally safe small town. So on cool summer nights, my mom would have the doors and windows open. It was the early 2000s, and of course windows and doors are open. Well, we had a midnight visitor, an owl. Weirdly enough, he was scared of blankets and flew from room to room, but never out the open windows and doors. My mom spent about an hour trying to get the owl out before she admitted defeat and called the non-emergency number. It was offline, so she called 911. When they answered, my mom explained that it wasn't exactly an emergency, but we had an owl in our house. The dispatch sent an officer, and he tried for a half hour with a blanket before telling my mom that the only way that he could think of getting was to shoot it out. But he didn't want to traumatize the kids, so he called the chief on his off day, who just so happened to be drinking with a ranger from the reserve. They both drove right over, and the ranger got to work. He walked casually towards the owl and said, "Oh, it's just a little barn owl," as he snatched it up by the talons. Everyone's mouth dropped as he walked out with the fly death pillow, asking if we kids wanted to pet it. After my mom politely declined, he walked a few hundred yards away and released it. The raptor flew away into the night with little noise, and the officers and ranger left us with an interesting story. A guy with a shotgun and an accomplice broke into my house about a decade ago. I was napping in bed, in my room in the back of the house. I awoke to my dog being scared and trying to get me up, and I noticed that someone, the accomplice, was holding their face up to the window of my bedroom and trying to see in. They probably heard the dog and were checking in, but it was especially bright out that day, and I don't believe that they could see in that well. I later found out that the robber was in my living room at this point. I wasn't sure what was going on, so I texted my roommate who had just moved in yesterday and asked him if he was home. He said no, he was at work. The robber was then dumping all of the clothes out of my laundry bag and was putting all of my game consoles, games, and my roommate's school laptop into the bag. He even took my hand-painted miniatures, which really bummed me out. I put so much work into those. He made off with them before I left my bedroom. I saw him and his accomplice as they were heading down the back street away from my house. I knew him as being the older brother of an acquaintance, and I would guess that the accomplice is the robber's girlfriend. I called the police and waited a bit for them to arrive. 2 officers sat down with me in my living room to go over the situation and see what we can do. I mentioned that I knew that it was the brother of the acquaintance and I could identify him. As we were discussing things, we hear the back door of the house open and someone call in, "Is anyone home?" My eyes went wide and I immediately knew it was him. I said in a terrified, stuttering voice, "That's him. That's him." The cops both got up and sprinted through the living room, dining room, kitchen, and then ran out the back door and tackled the guy in the backyard. He was arrested on the spot. As I was watching them restrain the robber in the backyard, I saw the accomplice slowly slink away down the alley. I wish I spoke up about it, but I was pretty shook at the time. He went to prison for a decade. Turns out, robbery with a lethal weapon is a pretty big crime. I never got my stuff back. The police had no way to prove which Xbox at his home was mine, or any of his stuff for that matter. I felt so horrible that my roommate got hit by collateral robbing only the day after moving in. No one deserves that. Not exactly a home invasion, but an interesting story nonetheless. So, as was found out later, a guy was partying with his friends in a skate park near my house. He got absolutely wasted, broke into the park ranger lot and stole a truck. He then proceeded to drive up and down the park road as fast as about 80 miles per hour, leaving skid marks from peeling out. Did this until he hit a tree. Miraculously, he didn't die as the tree was about 3 to 4 feet in diameter. He hit it almost head on, going fast enough that the truck flew about 30 feet to the side and tore a huge gash in the trunk of the tree. He escaped the wreck. Truck was totaled. And then, still being drunk and now also likely severe brain damage, he just started walking down the road, climbed over the first gate in the fence he saw, as was seen by the blood-stained handprints and footprints. The gate was not locked, and could have easily been opened if he wasn't delirious. He walked down the path, turned right at the first road that he came to, and then followed that road to the end. The end of the road is my house. We had stupidly left a door unlocked. We're normally very careful about that, but that one night something messed up. The guy comes into our house, grabbed some Easter candy and a blanket, and then went outside and started knocking on the door. That is when I heard him. It was 5 a.m. I was up all night prior to that, and had been in the front of the house right before he came, but then went to my room right before he got there. I heard him knocking from my room and went to investigate. I found the door unlocked, but closed, and a man in jeans and a t-shirt, and nothing else, with blood all over his head and front. He was looking into the windows of the car in the driveway. I went to get my dad and told him what I saw. My dad went out and talked to him. He had no idea where or who he was, or how he came to be there. He just wanted to get back to his friends. He was very laid back and nonviolent, just confused and in shock. We called 911. The police came. Then more police came. Then the fire department, then the ambulance. He had no ID and didn't know his name. They checked him out and took him to the hospital. I don't know what happened after that. No one aside from him was hurt, thankfully, and we were only down some candy and a wool army blanket. Speed bumps were installed on the park road very soon after this. I woke up at 3 a.m. to my 2 dogs barking like crazy. Oddly enough, that night was the first night that my wife and I were trying to keep the dogs downstairs, instead of letting them sleep in the bed with us. So I'd put up the baby gate, but they had knocked it over in their fervor and were still standing on the opposite side of the baby gate. I came out to the top of the stairs, of the 2-story foyer, and hissed at him to quiet down so they didn't wake the baby. Then I noticed a flashlight panning slowly around the foyer. From the garage door, visible to me but not visible to the dogs, there was a figure there holding a flashlight and looking around. I'm guessing he was calculating whether or not the dogs were crated, and or if anyone was home. In my deepest possible voice, I bellowed, "Hey, you in the garage. You need to get out of here before things get messy." The figure didn't move, except moving the flashlight around more. I ran back into the bedroom and grabbed a 20 and a 30-pound kettlebell and my phone, purposefully making as much noise and clanking as possible, and ran back. The only way into the house from the garage meant walking directly under me. I just hoped I could send him this little present before the dogs jumped in. By the time I got back, though, he was gone. I dialed 911. Cops came in about 4 minutes. They were convinced that it was a raccoon or something. A big raccoon with a flashlight. They swept the area anyway real quick and didn't find him. Also, I was very cautious about avoiding getting shot by the cops in my own home. I stayed on the phone with the 911 dispatcher until the cops arrived and stood in a brightly lit room and waved hello to them from the window and confirmed with the dispatcher that they knew that it was me. This happened when I was 10, and to call it traumatizing would be a huge understatement. I was at my cousin's house with my mom and my brother. My cousins were involved in some very shady things, which wasn't out of the norm for my entire extended family. It was dark outside. I was in the living room with my mom, aunt, the mother of the 2 cousins in question. She's the same age as my mom, so we just called her aunt. And the 2 babies that were in the house at the time. Literally out of nowhere, the front door opens and a person dressed in black from head to toe walked in. Then another, and another, and another. I don't know how many total, but in the 10 seconds that it took the adults to digest what was about to unfold, at least 6 people had come into the house. Everyone had weapons, and everyone's faces were covered. My aunt and mom handed me the babies and told me to lock us and my brother in the bathroom and to hide in the tub. They started dragging my cousins from bedrooms and out into the yard. We heard screaming and gunshots, and then things started to go quiet. We waited for what felt like an eternity and decided that we needed to go look. My brother was too afraid, so I crept out of the bathroom to a side window, and the only actual fighting that I saw was my cousin's girlfriend fighting another female. More gunshots, and I run back into the bathroom. Then finally, sirens. By the time the cops coaxed us out of the bathroom, the intruders had either fled or been arrested. 2 cousins served time for that situation. One served 10 years and the other 15. In hindsight, that likely means that these were not their first offenses. My dad came and picked us up. There was so much blood on the front lawn. It took me 2 years to set foot back in that house. It was the middle of winter in Syracuse, New York. I lived with my friend. Both of us were female, and we lived in a first-floor apartment. It's about 5 a.m. I'm trying to go to sleep, and I hear a weird bang. I thought it was my roommate going to the bathroom because I heard loud footsteps. But the footsteps didn't stop like they would have if it was her. At this point, my vision goes blue with anxiety. That's the best way I can describe it. I was cold and shaking from fear because something similar had happened only a few months before. But that guy hadn't been able to break down our door. Same roommate, different apartment. At the time, I slept with a large kitchen knife by my bed and pepper spray because of the aforementioned attempted break-in. I grab the knife and pepper spray, go over to my door, and very slowly open it a crack so I can barely see out. For a few seconds, I see nothing. And for context, my bedroom opened up to the living room, but a sheer curtain was hung just outside of my room, so no one could see in, but I could see out. After a few agonizing seconds, I see one person walk by dressed in all black and a hoodie, then a second person with a backpack. I try to stay quiet and close my door, but I fiddled with the lock. It happens in real life, not just horror movies. So they heard me. I heard rushed footsteps and assumed that they were going to try and get me. I jumped out of my window. The first person I attempted to call was my roommate, but it went straight to voicemail. So for the next sequence of events, I seriously thought that my roommate was dead. Just keep that in mind to set the tone. I'm now on my driveway, with no way to get back in the house except of how high the window is. I turn my foot from the drop. I have no shoes on, only boxers and a big t-shirt, as well as my knife, pepper spray, and phone. By now, I'm on the phone with 911. As I'm standing there, unsure of which direction to go, I see two guys running behind my house and laughing. They saw me in the driveway and started to run over to me. I wasn't sure if they were the robbers, but just to be safe, I sprinted, the best I could with a messed up foot and increasingly frozen toes, the other direction towards the street. We had neighbors we were friends with in a house just across the street, so I run behind their house and try their back door because sometimes it's unlocked, but to no avail. It was locked. So I decide to hide between their cars. All this time, I had still been on the phone with 911 operator, explaining, crying, and also apologizing because I was so distraught that I really thought that I could have been wrong, and I'm calling 911 for no reason. Just as I'm about to literally get under a car to hide, she tells me an officer is pulling up. This is within minutes of me calling, around 3. She tells me to walk to the street to find the officer. Again, I would like to remind you, I have no pants or shoes on in the middle of winter, so I look insane. I find the officer, who turns out to also have a canine, which was comforting. I show him which house, and as he shines his flashlight, it falls on a curtain blowing in the breeze. They ended up basically swatting my roommate because we weren't sure if the robbers were still in the house. They released a dog in the house, and after she got out, so that was exciting. But it turns out those jovial guys in my backyard were the robbers. They had popped a window on our front porch, gotten the chance to steal nothing but a $5 bill, left the shovel they popped the window with, and dropped one of their phones in the area that I had seen them running to. I'm assuming that's where their car was. They came back the next night and flashed a knife at the Ring camera in the backyard, which was awesome. So fun. We moved out. They were caught that summer. They were serial robbers and broke in while someone was awake again. I wish them the worst. I was 16 years old, home alone, 20 miles out from town. I heard someone trying the basement door, which was old and heavy and made a lot of noise and wouldn't open if you didn't know the trick. I called my brother, who lived up the road several miles, but he wasn't home. It crossed my mind that it was him there to get something, and that scared me more than an intruder. I was afraid that I'd shoot my own brother. I had zero fear of an intruder. I had a 30-30 that I got and loaded. They gave up on the basement door and came to the back door and tried the knob, turning and bumping the door hard. I stepped into view of the door. Light inside, dark outside, so I couldn't see their face. My foolish plan was to go look through the glass, and if it wasn't my brother, shoot them through the door. Illegal, as they hadn't broken the door yet, but I didn't know that at the time. The local sheriff had told us that if we fear for our lives, we can use lethal force and not be arrested. There were murders nearby and people out in the country armed up, and things was getting edgy. So he had a community meeting. Murderers were caught. It was meth related. Anyway, as I approached the door with the rifle, the now turning and door pounding stopped. They ran off into the darkness. It never occurred to me to call the sheriff's office for help. After it was over, the nerves hit. I called my aunt. We didn't have cell phones in that area back then, so Mom was unreachable. I guess I needed my mom, and my aunt was the closest thing. She offered to come stay with me, but she lived in town and there was no real reason, just someone to talk to until my mom got home was good enough. Weird thing, I was calm as I am right now while this was happening. But seconds after it was over, I shook all over. Whatever they wanted, they didn't want it bad enough to come past that 30-30. I'm an avid supporter of gun ownership. Some of my anti-gun friends like to tell me that I wouldn't defend myself if someone broke in, that I'd panic, and shooting a person isn't as easy as I think, and there's no way that I know what I could do, blah blah blah. I do know. Question asked and answered over 20 years ago. My only fear at the time was what if it was someone way out by chance, that it was my brother coming in. He had a key, but what if? That's the one and only reason that I didn't shoot through the door. I'm glad I didn't, as I found out later that it would have been illegal in my state, despite what the sheriff told us. I was about 16, and I was at my 20-year-old boyfriend's house. It was the first time that he'd moved out from his family home. Literally the first day of him living there, and he was living with 4 other guys. 2 were friends of ours. One was a 30-plus-year-old friend, and the last guy they called Shady. Yes, it was a very promising living situation. The doorbell rings and I go to answer it. I see a guy that I knew, who had dated my friend. I say hi and he asks me why I was here. I explain my then BF had just moved in. He asks to see how his room was set up or something. Maybe asked to say hi to him. It was a while ago, but I was casual and essentially a way to get into the room. As soon as I let him in the house, immediately 2 other guys come out of nowhere and follow him in. If you can't tell, I was used to hanging out with sketchy people, so alarm bells weren't ringing right away. My friend/home invader and I were already heading to my boyfriend's room. When we get in, he immediately turns around and locks the door and tells us that we are going to be staying in here for a while. He did it under the guise of wanting to talk to my ex about his turntables, saying they were actually his and had been stolen. In the rest of the house, my 2 actual friends were kept in a room at gunpoint by one of the home invaders. The 30-year-old dude was bear-maced along with Shady, who also got slashed across the face. Yes, they were after drugs. Big surprise. After they left, and with half the house wheezing from getting maced, we left to walk to a local burger joint. Shady wanted to call the cops, because I don't know why. He didn't want to hang around after that, so we left. While we were walking, the cops had a chopper out. Not sure if they knew to look for us or just the home invaders. Anyway, I still think the initial dude that I opened the door to saw me and immediately moved to protect me a bit. He looked very much surprised to see me, and I doubt that he wanted to get in trouble for assaulting a minor. Several years later, that guy was found in the walls of a local mall. Pretty sad. He had a lot of problems, but he had some good in him, too. It was a nice summer day years ago. I was at home playing Battlefield 3. I had my windows open for the nice breeze with the screens in. All of a sudden, I look over and the window that is under my porch by my front door pops out onto my floor. I then see a leg come through my window. I have my Kimber Custom 2 1911 .45 caliber sitting right beside me, loaded with the safety on and in a holster. I pull it out and slowly walk towards my window. I'm about 15 feet from the window right now, and the guy is coming in at this point. He looks right at me. and I am now pointing my loaded firearm at his chest. It was like this awkward 5 or so seconds before I said, "I'll kill you if you don't leave right now." The dude immediately jetted out of the same window that he came in and ran up my road. I have never seen a human being run as fast as this person did. It was unreal how fast he ran. He was fully hooded, with a balaclava on, and I couldn't see his face. I called the police, but they didn't find him, even though they had 4 patrol cars at my home, and they were searching the whole area. They even used a police drone, but nothing, sadly. Since then, I have never had another issue here. Our little neighborhood is very secure thanks to it just being me and my 2 other neighbors. We all know each other super well. We watch each other's homes and stuff all the time. We all have outdoor cameras and inside cameras. We all have stupid amounts of pistols, rifles, and shotguns. Basically, don't mess with us. With all that said, I was scared to death during the whole ordeal. I didn't want to kill another human being, but I would have pulled the trigger if I had to. No doubt in my mind, I wouldn't have if it came down to him or me. It was just an awful experience. I'm still so angry at that guy for putting me in that situation, where I would have had to live with killing another person, and the trauma that would have brought with it. Screw that guy, and I hope he rots wherever he is. A few years ago, I had just arrived home from a quick convenience store trip at night around 8:30 to 9 p.m. My now ex-wife and I were about to watch a movie. The movie was Anchorman 2. We heard a commotion in our front yard, and I looked out the front window. The guy was rolling around in my front yard. I didn't think much of it, maybe some kid goofing off or whatever, so I closed the curtains and ignored it. Don't know the truth of it, but I'm assuming now that he must have been having a very bad trip of some kind. He started shouting, so I looked out the window again. At this time, he started moving towards my front door. Luckily, it was kind of broken. It would jam a lot, and required a lot of effort to open. He tried to open it, and at that point, I managed to lock it. He didn't stop trying to open it, started kicking it, pounding on it. The adrenaline rush that I had will never leave my memory. I have a couple of decorative katanas around my house. One was specifically above my dresser mirror. I ran to my bedroom and yanked it off of its stand. I tossed the scabbard to the floor and yelled for my wife to lock herself and our kids in our bathroom. As she did, I tossed my phone to her to dial 911. She locked up with her and our boys in the bathtub. I then stood by the front door in what I assumed was the best possible kenjutsu stance that I could muster. It's kind of a blur. The sword was held over my head with the adrenaline flowing. It seemed to last forever. My heart was pounding. I could feel my heartbeat in my head and my ears. Then silence. The adrenaline held for quite a while. My neighbor heard the commotion and came across the street with his handgun. The guy had run off. The police showed up and eventually caught him about 10 minutes later down the street. I can remember as I was walking to an officer on my porch, I heard another officer yell, "There he is." Then a flurry of "Get down, get down, get down," as they tackled him through a neighbor's small wooden fence. I will never forget it. I don't know how I would have acted had he actually come through the door. I assume that I would have brought that sword down hard. That mess would have been terrible. The adrenaline rush was tough enough. The come down from that was brutal. The only silver lining that I can take away is that many people think that they have the courage to defend their families, but never get to find out the truth. I know that I have done so, and I'll always know the answer to that question. I reacted and didn't even think about what I was doing. It was the most natural, primal feeling. I don't wish it on anyone. Also, as a side note, I have a severe negative association with the movie that we were going to watch, and have never wanted to watch it since. About 2.5 years ago, my daughter woke up at around 2:30 in the morning to a strange man standing in her room. She yelled, "Who are you? What are you doing? Stay there." She ran upstairs to our room and said, "There's someone in the house." My wife thought that she was having a nightmare, but she was so distraught that I yelled, "Who's there?" down the stairs. A voice yelled back, "They told me to come here." I immediately grabbed my daughter and my wife and started to run to our room because they had followed. My daughter yelled to get her brother, and we ran into his room and basically yanked him from his bed. We went to my room, closed and locked the door, grabbed the key to my gun safe and my wife's phone, went into our bathroom, closed and locked the door, then went into my closet. I got and loaded my gun while my wife called 911, while my kids hid in the back of the closet. 911 asked if he was still in the house. I explained our location and said I didn't know. They asked me to check. I clarified that they wanted me to leave the closet, leave the locked bathroom, leave the locked bedroom, all with my gun and see. They said yes. I went out to the landing and yelled again. He appeared at the base of the stairs. With my gun trained on him, I yelled for him to leave. He began pacing back and forth, shouting, "They're going to kill me. He told me to come here. My father told me to come here." Over and over. If he had moved up the stairs, I would have shot, but he didn't. I went back into the closet with my family, locking doors behind me. By that time, the police were on site. They went around the back of our house and were about to come in the back door. We told them that we forgot to lock it, and that's how that we thought that he got in. As they reached for the door, they heard the deadbolt click. The 911 operator asked me to come out and unlock the door. I told them that I didn't know where he was in the house and didn't know if he was armed, and that I wouldn't engage with him unless it was absolutely necessary. We told them to kick in our door. The police later told me that they were screaming to open the door and identifying themselves, and were raising their leg to kick open the door when it swung open. At that time, the operator asked me what I was wearing and my race. When my answers didn't match what the person opening the door was wearing or his race, they tackled him and cuffed him. He kept repeating the same thing that he yelled to me. "They're going to kill me. They told me to come here. My father told me to come here." The whole time they questioned him and got him some medical attention for scrapes and stuff from being tackled. He spent the next 7 months in jail before working a plea deal and being released on probation. We had never seen or met the dude before. He lived over an hour away, and toxicology showed no drugs in his system. He struggled with mental illness, was off his meds, and had a psychotic episode. Very scary for all of us. Lots of trauma, especially for my daughter. Almost a year of none of us sleeping well and responding to noises in the middle of the night with varying degrees of alarm. We're getting better, but we still have effects randomly to this day. So my house was broken into. I had just fallen asleep. I was abruptly woken up to someone stumbling around downstairs. I sat up and waited to make sure that I wasn't tripping. Sure enough, someone was in my house. I ran downstairs butt naked and saw a man standing in my kitchen looking through my mail. I said, "What the heck are you doing here?" He didn't answer, but he kind of lunged towards me, so I went crazy. I grabbed him by his shirt and twisted it up and wrestled him out of my house. My living room is 2 steps lower than my kitchen, so we both fell down the steps, which hurt like heck. I was recovering from an accident, so my body was very fragile at the time. I kicked him out of my house and realized that he was very drunk and very high. Well, his stupid butt decided that he didn't want to leave. He kept kicking my door, breaking my potted plants outside, etc. I literally turned on the rage. I saw absolute red and ran outside, and I choked him while manhandling him. Remember, I was still butt naked at the time. It was such an awful feeling squeezing someone's throat so hard and hearing him gasp for what little air he could find. Finally, he passed out from me choking him. I ran upstairs and grabbed some shorts and my gun. I was so angry that I remember he woke up, and I was saying some things very violent to him. My poor wife was upstairs thinking someone was murdering me. She was sobbing and crying and hiding in the closet trying to call 911. We get poor reception at our house, so the call kept dropping. I yelled for her to come downstairs to help me at this point. I knew he needed to go to jail. He was a danger to himself and others. After the perp came, he was talking to the old usual stuff, saying that I was racist and that I'm the problem with the world, etc. Finally, the police show up, and as they're rolling up, he pushes me into some bushes and tries to run away. Well, as he's running, he hits his shoulder into a tree, slides across the hood of a car like a cartoon character, and falls to the ground. I once again chase him. We wrestle a bit, and I choke him out again. My wife is holding the gun at this point. The cops come and I throw my hands in the air, point out the suspect. He gets arrested and I proceed to puke violently, shaking with adrenaline. This guy was on some high-level employee of some very large tech companies. I won't mention the companies, but he had no business acting like this. He goes to jail, and the whole time is talking nonsense. We dropped the criminal charges, but are suing him in civil court. That was 2017, and we are still dealing with the case. PTSD from the incident, as well as my wreck less than a year before. Just an absolute nightmare of a year. I don't feel comfortable in my home anymore even to this day. I hear things, even if it's nothing. There's more to this story, but I think I've said enough. I was 3 at the time of this incident, so I couldn't do much. We lived in an apartment in the North Bronx. 2 men knocked on the door, and a cousin who was living with us at the time opened the door. Before he could do that, I ran and hid in the closet, right by the front door. I loved to jump out and surprise the people who came in. My cousin yelled out to my mom, saying they were delivering flowers for her. When she got to the door, they pulled out guns and pushed her aside. So I jumped out of the closet, and one of the men grabbed me and put a gun to my head. I peed myself. My mom flipped out and started fighting the guy. He dropped the gun and my mom went for it. He beat her to it and pushed us into the living room. My grandmother, my dad, my cousin, and my cousin's wife were all there. I think one of my aunts was there too. They made us lay on the floor. I don't remember any of the above. I remember being in the living room floor with my mom on top of me. One guy took my dad to the office. He knew about the safe and jewelry. The other guy stayed in the living room with us. He kept saying, "Don't look at me." But I was 3, so I looked. I remember his hands shaking, and that he wore glasses that were similar to the glasses one of my uncles used to wear. While this was happening, the other guy started pistol whipping my father to get him to open the safe. He did, and the guy grabbed all the cash and jewelry that he could find. The next thing I remember was the guys being gone. We were waiting for the police to arrive, and I wanted my security blanket. They wouldn't let me get it because the police said not to touch anything. We moved to Miami shortly thereafter. That was 43 years ago, and let me tell you, that day traumatized me. It's my first memory. I freak out if someone has a gun, and I start to cry whenever I think about it. Like right now. I had a bunch of other traumas throughout my childhood, and I desperately needed therapy. I finally put myself in therapy in my mid-20s. I had developed borderline personality disorder. It took a ton of therapy, including EMDR, and meds before I was finally able to manage my CPTSD and maladaptive behavior patterns. Also, they never caught the guys that broke into our home. Thank you so much for listening to all of the stories in this video. I hope you enjoyed them. I also hope that you enjoy the extra rain at the end. Get a good night's sleep, everyone, and I'll read to you in the next video. Bye-bye now.